brought me a beautiful breakfast in bed as a celebration, which is very, very rare because
During a global pandemic that shut the world down, a former opera singer living in a 40-room French chateau started filming herself. No production crew, no broadcast deal. Just a camera, a crumbling 16th century building, and a life that looked nothing like the one the rest of the world was locked inside. Hundreds of thousands of people found her. $500,000 followed. And then came the questions. Where was the renovation money actually going? Who was the young Dutchman who arrived as a volunteer and apparently never left? And what was really happening behind the warm, candlelit, champagne-filled world of the Chateau Diaries? The full story of Stephanie Jarvis is considerably more complicated than any vlog has shown. How a former opera singer ended up in a French chateau. Most people dream of buying a chateau in France. Stephanie Jarvis actually did it at 29 years old with her ex-boyfriend, using the proceeds from 2 London flats. That sentence requires a moment, because the practical logic of that decision, once you look at it closely, is both completely insane and completely understandable. And it tells you almost everything you need to know about who Stephanie Jarvis actually is. She was born on August 18th, 1975. British father, French mother, both nurses. They did something unusual with the money they had. Instead of buying a modest family home, they purchased a large country estate and converted it into a residential facility for Alzheimer's patients. The family moved into the attic. The patients occupied the main house below. This is the childhood that produced Stephanie Jarvis. Not a conventional one. A life lived in a large house full of people who needed care, company, and beautiful surroundings. Her parents believed genuinely that living in gracious surroundings was therapeutic, that the environment you inhabit shapes the quality of your experience within it. That belief became the operating principle of everything she would later build. She grew up. She moved to London. She pursued what she described as a half-hearted career in opera. The voice was there. The commitment to the specific grind of a professional opera career was less certain. She was in her late 20s, living in a 2-bedroom London flat, and quietly despairing about what her life was actually adding up to. And then she had a conversation with her best friend, an ex-boyfriend named Nick Larkin, the kind of friendship that outlasts the romantic dimension and becomes something more durable and more interesting. She was complaining about London housing costs. He was doing the same. And then one of them said the thing that changed the course of both of their lives. For the price of 2 London 2-bedroom flats, you could buy a chateau in France. She said later that it was completely insane, and she was right. It was. But the logic was impeccable in the specific way that only the best ideas are. They did the numbers. They sold their flats. They found a property in the Haute-Vienne region of central France. And in 2005, Stephanie Jarvis and Nick Larkin, with their co-owner Michael Potts, purchased Chateau de Lalande in Crozon-sur-Vouve for approximately 890,000 euros. Let that sit for a moment. Not a cottage, not a farmhouse, a 16th century chateau with 40 rooms, 600 years of history embedded in its walls, a property that had previously been owned by a cousin of Louis XIV. La Grande Mademoiselle, one of the most prominent women in 17th century France, had connections to its history.
It's such a beautiful morning, and Philip and I don't usually get to see such an early morning.
And 2 people in their late 20s with the proceeds of 2 London flats had just bought it. The scale of what they had taken on became apparent almost immediately. A historic French property of that size and age is not a renovation project. It is a lifelong occupation. The structural challenges alone, the damp, the crumbling plasterwork, the outdated electrics, the ancient plumbing, would have defeated most people before the first year was out. Stephanie and her co-owners were not most people. The chateau began operating as a bed and breakfast during summer months, an income stream, a way of connecting the property to the outside world while the slow work of restoration continued around it. Volunteers began arriving to help. The eclectic community that would eventually become the heart of the Chateau Diaries started forming naturally and organically. Her French mother, Fanny, came to live there. Her adopted Scottish brother, Jerry Grady, the owner of a taxi business in Framlingham, who had grown up close to the Jarvis family, became a regular presence. Michael Potts, her co-owner, documented the chateau and its life through photography with a consistency that gave the project its visual archive. In 2018, Channel 4's Escape to the Chateau Diaries brought cameras to Lalande for the first time. The show documented various Britons renovating French properties. Stephanie's chateau featured prominently. A national television audience discovered what was happening at Lalande. But it was a different kind of camera that would eventually change everything. By 2019, Stephanie Jarvis had built something genuinely remarkable. A community, a project, a life in France that had been assembled from nothing over 15 years of extraordinary effort. And then the pandemic arrived, and everything changed again. The pandemic, the YouTube channel, and the unlikely rise to fame. When COVID shut down the world in 2020, it also shut down Lalande's bed and breakfast income. For a historic chateau with 3 co-owners and an ongoing restoration project that generated no external revenue when the guests stopped coming, that was a serious problem. The summer B&B operation was not a hobby, it was a financial foundation. Without it, the chateau needed another way to sustain itself. Stephanie Jarvis picked up a camera, not a professional camera, not a broadcast quality setup arranged by a production company with a brief and a schedule. A camera she already owned, pointed at the life that was already happening around her. No script, no crew, no plan beyond the simple impulse to share what Lalande looked like when the world outside had gone quiet.
I know this is something that a lot of you have speculated about before. Many people believe.
The timing was extraordinary. In the spring of 2020, hundreds of millions of people were locked in small urban apartments, staring at walls. The average living space in most European and British cities is considerably less than 40 rooms. The gap between what most people were confined to and what Stephanie was filming from could not have been wider. And it turned out that gap was precisely what an enormous number of people needed to look into. CNN would later describe the Chateau Diaries as the unlikely YouTube quarantine hit. That description is accurate in every particular. Nothing about it was designed to go viral. Nothing about it was engineered for algorithmic success. It simply existed. Genuinely, warmly, eccentrically. A former opera singer in a falling down French chateau hosting dinner parties and uncovering painted ceilings and documenting the extraordinary community that had assembled in the middle of nowhere during a global emergency. The cast of that community was the channel's secret weapon. Fanny, the French mother, provided a specific and irresistible energy. Jerry, the Scottish adopted brother with the taxi business in Framlingham, brought the outsider's perspective on chateau life. Michael Potts, the co-owner who photographed everything, gave the visual record its texture. Natalia, the Argentine house manager, whose warmth anchored the operational life of the property, became a beloved figure in her own right. Various volunteers arrived and contributed and became part of the story. The ensemble nature of what Stephanie had assembled at Lalande was not incidental. It reflected her deepest instinct, the same instinct that had made her buy a 40-room chateau with her ex-boyfriend rather than a sensible 2-bedroom cottage. She genuinely wanted to live surrounded by people. She had grown up that way. She had built Lalande that way for 15 years. The pandemic cameras simply showed the rest of the world what that life actually looked like. It looked like what most people had stopped believing was possible. A community living and working and eating and celebrating together in a beautiful place, with no particular urgency and no particular agenda beyond the day in front of them. The audience grew rapidly, then dramatically, then to a scale that Stephanie had not anticipated when she first pointed the camera at her kitchen table. And then came Patreon. The Chateau Diaries launched a Patreon campaign to fund specific restoration projects at Lalande, the chapel, various rooms. The structural work that no amount of B&B income could fully finance. Supporters could contribute monthly at various levels and receive exclusive content, behind-the-scenes access, and the specific satisfaction of knowing they were directly contributing to the preservation of a 16th century building. The response was extraordinary. Over $500,000 raised from supporters across the campaign's lifetime. A genuinely significant sum built entirely from the voluntary contributions of people who had watched the channel and decided that what Stephanie was doing was worth funding. And then Philip Jansen arrived. He came as a volunteer in 2020, a Dutchman born in September 1996, 29 years old in 2026. He spoke 4 languages. He had studied arts, history, and theater. He was, by various accounts, genuinely interested in the chateau's history, researching its documents and prints with a seriousness that went beyond casual interest. He stayed, and as the channel continued and the Patreon grew and the audience watched week after week, Philip Jansen became an increasingly central presence, not just in the chateau's daily operations, in Stephanie's personal life. Everything looked extraordinary from the outside, and a great deal of it genuinely was. But an online community had formed that was asking questions the channel's warm aesthetic was not answering, and those questions were getting louder. The Patreon controversy. The question that would not go away. $500,000 is a significant amount of money in any context, for any purpose, but particularly in the context of a renovation project on a private property owned by 3 individuals who had been living there for nearly 2 decades before any of that money arrived. The Chateau Diaries Patreon campaign was built on a straightforward promise. Supporters contributing monthly would be directly funding the restoration of Chateau de Lalande, the chapel, the rooms, the structural work that the B&B income and the Chateau owner's personal resources could not fully cover. The beautiful things that were crumbling and needed saving. People believed in it, hundreds of them, contributing month after month, watching the channel, investing not just their attention but their actual money in the projects Stephanie was describing, and then they started asking where the results were. This is the central question that has followed the Chateau Diaries across the last several years. Not the relationship, not the age gap, not the community dynamics, the money, the renovation. The gap between what was raised and what was visibly completed. It is worth approaching this question carefully, because it exists in 2 forms simultaneously, a legitimate form and an exaggerated form. The legitimate form is this. Over $500,000 raised for a renovation project across several years represents a genuine accountability obligation to the people who contributed it. They deserve to understand where their money went and what it produced. That is not a hostile position. That is the basic expectation of anyone who has given money to a cause they care about. The exaggerated form is the version that circulates in certain online spaces where criticism of Stephanie has hardened into something more sustained and more personal. The version that treats every international trip as evidence of misappropriation. The version that reads every lifestyle post as a provocation to the people who contributed to the Patreon. This script deals with the legitimate form. The exaggerated form is not a factual resource. So what does the record actually show? The chapel restoration at Lalande is one of the most documented and visible outcomes of the Patreon era. This was a project that Stephanie described specifically and repeatedly as a Patreon-funded restoration goal. It was completed. It was filmed. It was presented to the audience that had contributed to it. The chapel went from a state of serious disrepair to something genuinely beautiful. That is a real thing. A real outcome from real money contributed by real supporters. But the chapel was one project within a chateau that has 40 rooms and centuries of accumulated structural challenges. The rest of the visible renovation progress has been slower, and the question of whether the pace of that progress reflects the scale of the funding is one that Stephanie's community has raised directly. She has addressed it on camera, in community posts, not always to the satisfaction of everyone asking. Her position, articulated across various videos and written updates, returns consistently to the same set of realities. Renovating a listed historic French property is not a process that money alone can accelerate. Planning permissions for a building of this age and status are subject to regulatory oversight that does not move on YouTube timelines. Structural work requires specialist craftspeople whose availability is not guaranteed by the size of the budget. The interdependency of renovation phases in a building. This old means that one problem discovered during one project frequently reveals 3 more problems underneath it. These are genuine constraints. Anyone who has renovated a historic property of any scale recognizes them immediately. They are not excuses. They are the documented reality of the kind of project Lalande represents. The legitimate question is whether the communication around those constraints has been clear enough and consistent enough to maintain the trust of the people funding them. That is a question only those supporters can ultimately answer for themselves. What is observable from the public record is this. The channel has continued. The Patreon has continued. The audience has continued. The renovation has continued at its own pace. And Stephanie Jarvis has not stopped showing up and making content about the life she is building at Lalande. The renovation controversy raised questions about accountability that she addressed publicly, but the personal story running alongside it was more complicated still. Because while the Patreon question was generating noise in the comment sections and online forums, something else was happening at Lalande. Something that had nothing to do with renovation timelines or funding structures.
I must keep something, some kernel in it all for myself, but my desire to keep everything private.
The man who arrived as a volunteer had become the most talked about person in the Chateau story, and that conversation had its own complicated dimensions. Stephanie, Philip, and the relationship the internet could not stop watching.
Because, as you know, I've never spoken about my love life on the Chateau Diaries. I've only spoken about...
He arrived as a volunteer. He stayed as a content collaborator. And somewhere along the way, Philip Jansen became the most discussed person in the Chateau Diaries world after Stephanie herself. That trajectory is worth understanding, because it says something about the specific dynamic of building a personal life inside a public content operation, something that most people who have never done it tend to underestimate until they watch it happen to someone else. Philip Jansen was born in September 1996 in the Netherlands. He is 29 years old in 2026. He grew up in the Netherlands, raised significantly by his grandparents while his parents worked. He speaks 4 languages fluently. He has studied arts, history, and theater. He later began studying opera like Stephanie. He had been in a youth boy band as a teenager. He is, by most accounts of people who have encountered him through the channel, genuinely interested in the history of Lalande specifically, researching historical documents and prints of the property with the kind of focused attention that suggests real intellectual investment rather than casual participation. He arrived at Lalande in 2020 as a volunteer, during a period when the normal world had closed down and the chateau was operating as something closer to a commune than a bed and breakfast. People came to help. Some stayed. Philip stayed. The relationship between him and Stephanie developed publicly, not in a confessional interview or an announcement post, simply through the accumulated evidence of the channel itself. The way 2 people who are in a relationship with each other move through the same space differently from 2 people who are simply sharing it. The audience noticed before anything was formally stated. That is always how it works when cameras are present consistently. The viewers develop a specific attentiveness to the gap between what is being shown and what is being implied. When the relationship became a confirmed part of the channel's narrative, the response was divided in the specific way that all public relationships with significant age gaps tend to be divided.
It couldn't be true. Obviously, there's a very, very big age difference, and that's also made me nervous about speaking.
The age gap is 21 years. Stephanie is 50 years old in 2026. Philip is 29. That gap is large by most social conventions. It is the kind of gap that produces immediate commentary from people who encounter it. Most of that commentary, it should be said, goes in the direction that most commentary about age gap relationships goes when the older party is a woman, is with a particular intensity that would not be applied with equivalent vigor if the genders were reversed. That observation is worth making, not to preemptively defend the relationship from scrutiny, but to acknowledge that the scrutiny it has received has not always been entirely even-handed in its framing.
Relationship is still considered extremely unusual, and if there's something that...
What the channel has shown across several years of consistent documentation is 2 people who appear to function well together in the specific and demanding context of running a chateau renovation project and a content operation simultaneously. Philip contributes to the channel. He engages with the history of the property. He participates in the events and the community gatherings that give the channel its character.
He's made me very happy. I found a friend that I had many shared interests in.
Whether that constitutes a genuine partnership in all the ways that word implies is not something any external viewer has access to. What the camera shows is the surface. The interior of any relationship is its own private territory. What the internet did with the Philip dimension of the Chateau Diaries story went considerably further than any careful assessment of available evidence warranted. Forum communities developed elaborate theories, comment sections filled with opinions stated with the confidence of people who had met both parties personally when they had not. The specific cruelty that online communities can generate toward women who make unconventional life choices arrived in force. Stephanie's response to all of it has been consistent. She has not engaged with the hostile commentary in ways that amplify it. She has not issued defenses or explanations that suggest she believes the relationship requires defending. She has simply continued to live her life and document it. That consistency is either the behavior of someone with nothing to justify, or the behavior of someone who has learned that engaging with certain kinds of attention makes everything worse, possibly both simultaneously.
Anything else. We know each other's families, they're very happy for us, Mummy is happy.
What the full picture of the Philip chapter in the Chateau Diaries story actually contains is still being written. 2026 shows 2 people still at Lalande, still working, still making content, still part of the same project.
The best thing to do is to address it with everybody and move on. I won't lie.
But behind the relationship questions and the renovation controversy, something was happening at Lalande that the audience watching from the outside could feel even when they could not fully name it. A loss was present in the story, a quiet, significant one, and it changed the character of everything. The loss of her father and what it meant for everything. Stephanie Jarvis's father, Derek, was not just her parent. He was the person whose way of seeing the world had shaped everything she eventually built. A nurse who believed that beautiful surroundings healed people. A man who had taken that belief seriously enough to purchase a country estate and fill it with Alzheimer's patients who needed exactly that. Who had moved his own family into the attic so that the people in his care could have the main house. That particular way of thinking about space and beauty and what environments do to the people inside them is not a design philosophy Stephanie arrived at independently. She absorbed it from watching her father live it out across her entire childhood. The Chateau Diaries on More 4, titled Chateau Diy, Living the Dream, and airing in May 2023, was described specifically and deliberately as taking inspiration from her late father's artwork. Not her training, not her taste, her late father's artwork. That single phrase in the program description carries more weight than it might appear to on first reading. It places the Chateau project inside a specific context of inheritance and continuation. The restoration of Lalande as an expression of values that came from Derek Jarvis and that Stephanie was carrying forward in his memory, which means he was gone before May 2023 when that description was written. The precise timing of his passing has not been publicly documented in any detailed way. What is confirmed is that by the time the More 4 documentary aired, he was described in the past tense, a man whose artwork was being used as inspiration, not a man who was present to see what his daughter had built. That is a specific kind of loss. The kind where the person who understood most completely what you were doing and why will never see the finished version of it. The kind that sits underneath everything you do afterward and changes the quality of the light. For Stephanie, whose entire project at Lalande is rooted in the belief that beautiful environments sustain human well-being, a belief she learned from her father. Losing the person who gave her that belief while the project was still unfinished creates a particular kind of weight. The channel does not dwell on it. That is consistent with how Stephanie generally handles the heavier dimensions of her life. She processes things and moves forward. The warmth and the celebration and the champagne and the dinner parties and the costumes are not a denial of the difficult things. They are the response to them. The insistence that life contains beauty even when it also contains loss. That insistence is the most coherent through line in everything the Chateau Diaries has ever produced. The community around Lalande has its own continuity and its own losses. Selmar Dwien, the Dutch volunteer who became a fan favorite by living in a camper van parked in the chateau grounds and working on various projects across the estate, eventually moved on. He now works at Chateau Les Villettes and continues working across France. His departure from Lalande was mourned by the audience in the specific way that parasocial communities mourn the exit of someone who had become part of their weekly experience. Dan, the former gardener and handyman whose presence gave the kitchen garden dimension of the channel its identity, also moved on. His chapter at Lalande ended. He became one of those figures whose absence the regular audience registers quietly and consistently. The ebb and flow of the community at Lalande is one of the most honest things the channel documents. People arrive, they contribute, they become part of the story. And then circumstances change and they leave and new people arrive and the story continues under different conditions. That is simply what a living community looks like. It is not designed for television continuity. It is not managed for audience satisfaction. It happens at its own pace and in its own way, and the camera captures what it captures. What has remained constant through all of the arrivals and departures is Stephanie herself, at the center of it. In the kitchen, at the table, in the garden, in the chapel, in the rooms that are being slowly and painstakingly brought back to life. With her father's way of seeing the world embedded in every decision she makes about what Lalande should become. The chateau kept going, the channel kept going, Stephanie Jarvis kept going, through the controversy and the personal loss and the public scrutiny and the grief that lives underneath all the celebration. That consistency is the most interesting thing about her story. And where it has arrived in 2026 is where the full picture finally comes into focus. Where Stephanie Jarvis and Chateau de Lalande stand in 2026, after everything. The pandemic fame, the Patreon controversy, the relationship scrutiny, the grief, the community arrivals and departures, and the online commentary that has followed every step of it. Where does Stephanie Jarvis actually stand in 2026? The honest answer is exactly where she has always been. In a 16th century chateau in the Haute-Vienne region of France, surrounded by people she loves, filming her life, raising money to restore a building that has been standing for 600 years and intends to stand for 600 more, hosting dinner parties and themed evenings and summer guests and the particular kind of community gathering that she has been organizing since the day she moved in. She is 50 years old in 2026. The chateau is still standing. She is still in it. That is not nothing. That is, in fact, everything.
Now I'm going to go back to making the Chateau Diaries. As usual, nothing is going to change there. It is not suddenly...
The YouTube channel is active. Regular uploads. The specific warmth that built the audience in 2020 is still the channel's defining quality in 2026. The aesthetic has evolved. The community has changed. Some of the original cast of characters from the pandemic era are no longer regular presences. New people have arrived and become part of the story. But the core of it is unchanged. A woman who bought a falling down chateau because she believed that living in a beautiful place surrounded by people was the best possible version of a life. Filming that belief being tested and sustained and demonstrated across years of genuine effort. The Patreon continues. Supporters are still contributing, the restoration is still ongoing. The chapel, one of the most visible Patreon-funded projects, stands as the most complete evidence of what the funding has produced. It was documented in detail across numerous videos. Its transformation from a state of serious disrepair to something genuinely beautiful represents a real and tangible outcome. Other projects continue at a pace that reflects the genuine complexity of what restoring a listed historic French property actually involves. That complexity does not diminish because the funding exists to address it. If anything, the funding makes more of the complexity visible. Because with money comes the ability to begin work that reveals problems that could not previously be seen. Philip Johnson is still at Lalande, still part of the channel, still part of Stephanie's life, 29 years old in 2026 to her 50. The 21-year gap that generated so much commentary has not closed. It has simply been lived alongside for 5 years now without either of them suggesting it presents a problem. They are still working, still creating, still building something at Lalande together. The Instagram account sits at 70,000 followers. The channel has an audience that extends across multiple countries. The More For television appearances in 2023 confirmed that British broadcast television remains interested in what is happening at Lalande. The broader chateau renovation YouTube space that Stephanie helped create has expanded significantly since 2020. Dick and Angel Strawbridge's Escape to the Chateau franchise remains the dominant presence in the category. But the universe of people documenting the restoration of French properties for online audiences has grown considerably. Stephanie was among its earliest significant voices. Her specific combination of community focus, personal warmth, and willingness to show the unglamorous alongside the glamorous gave the genre much of its character. What she has built is not just a channel. It is a specific ongoing record of what it looks like to commit to something difficult and complicated and expensive and beautiful for 20 years and counting. The record has its contested dimensions. The Patreon questions are real and deserve ongoing honest engagement. The renovation pace has generated frustration among supporters who expected more visible progress against the funds raised. But the questions that were always most interesting about the Chateau Diaries were never really about the renovation timeline. They were about whether it was possible to build the kind of life Stephanie wanted to build, the kind her parents had modeled in their own eccentric way. A large house full of people, beauty that serves the community, space that sustains well-being. Those questions have been answered in 2026 in the most straightforward way possible. She built it. Not perfectly, not without controversy, not without loss and grief and public scrutiny and online commentary from people who have invested themselves in her story in ways she never fully requested. But she built it. Chateau de Lalande is 21 years into a project that most people would have abandoned by year 3. The woman who bought a 40-room chateau with her ex-boyfriend at 29 because she believed beautiful surroundings sustained human life is 50 years old and still there. And the camera is still rolling. Stephanie Jarvis bought a crumbling French chateau at 29 with her ex-boyfriend and a belief that beautiful surroundings make life worth living. 21 years later, she is still there, still restoring, still filming, still building the community her parents taught her to value before she was old enough to understand why. The controversy is real, the questions are legitimate, but so is everything she has built at Lalande across 2 decades of genuine commitment. That combination of imperfection and persistence is the most human story the channel has ever told. If this resonated, leave a comment. Tell us what the Chateau Diaries means to you.